All right, everybody, welcome to another video on Max School Prep TV. We are featuring another student success story, and today we have a peer of mine at Duke University, Miss Allison Falls. Allison, thank you so much for being here with us today. We're excited to get to know you and a little bit about your story, but first I'm gonna have you go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know your year, where you're from, what you're studying, kind of all that like normal icebreaker stuff, and then also give us three things that you are looking forward to about going home for break, because we're on that other end of the semester. We're almost done, so passing it over to you, darling.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about stuff today and answer any questions. But my name is Allison, and I am a senior at Duke, and I am studying psychology with a minor in education. So um, we can get more into that later because that was always not a clear path for me, but this is what I've ended up studying, and I really love it. I am from North Carolina, so I'm from Richlands, North Carolina, which is about like a 2-hour drive away from Durham, where Duke is. So it's closer to the coast. It's a pretty small town, and yeah, that's where home is. So I'm excited to go back home for break and see my family and friends from high school. And yeah, some other things I'm looking forward to are definitely like my Boston trip I have coming up. I'm having kind of like a girls' trip reunion with some incredible people I met over the summer during my internship there. And I think another thing I'm looking forward to is definitely baking. That's kind of like a Christmas tradition with my family. So I'm looking forward to all the good sweet treats that we're gonna make.
Awesome. That actually sounds like a lot of stuff to look forward to, and I'm going to come back to your internship in Boston because I think did you meet Dr. Malone?
I did not,
Okay,
but
then
yeah.
you know which one I'm talking about. Okay, because I was like, I'm still gonna come back to that because I want to know what that was about. And if you see me taking notes or like writing, it's because this is just like putting pins and things that I want to ask you about later. But I kind of want to move in chronological order. So first, it's wonderful that you're so excited to go home and see your family. And I'm curious about kind of your family structure, but also how would you say that your parents or maybe it's some siblings or whatever have really been influential in your path towards higher education and getting into Duke? How they informed some of the values that you have on that front?
Yeah, for sure. So to tell you a little bit about my family, so I have one older sister named Madeline, and then my parents, who like we all lived together in a house growing up, and none of them went to college. So I am the first person in my family to go to college, and I'm also coming from a lower income background. But it's crazy to me thinking back that I kind of always thought college could be an option for me, which is, I think, just goes to show the encouragement my parents had, and maybe, like really good mentors and teachers I had growing up. Because even though no one in my family had gone to college and accomplished that before, I still, based on like the people I surrounded myself with, it seemed like that would be what I would want to do. So, yeah, I think my parents were very, like um encouraging, and I guess like allowed me to like explore different things. Like I started sports when I was young and like did the beta club, which I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the National Beta Club. It's kind of like the honor society almost, or I forget what the other one's called, but beta is kind of, it's based on academics but also service, so you do so many volunteer hours. So like I think they were just very supportive in allowing me to pursue a lot of like extracurriculars and stuff like that. But yeah, so that value of just like doing our best and everything, and then I think just my own like individual like personality and wanting to do well, and I had good connections with teachers, really helped me get to where I am. So, and I will mention too just some background on like my education as well. So I went to like public school throughout K through 12. So yeah, got lucky with like really great teachers who believed in me as well and like knew me outside of the classroom. So I think that was, really formative, and I still have connections with some of them today. Yeah.
Well, I think one huge testament that your story kind of emphasizes is we really are the product of who we surround ourselves with. And I think you were super fortunate in being able to have like a strong community of people who maybe they didn't go to college, at least some of them, but were still wanting to encourage you to really tap into your full potential. And I think a question that I have for you is, what would you say to people who may not be so fortunate as to like, because I think I can relate to having parents like you who were like, I want you to kind of maximize your potential, and going to college is going to help you do that and being plugged in with extracurriculars, et cetera. But for those students who are out there who may also be first gen like you, but don't necessarily have parents or even teachers or mentors who are kind of giving them those messages, do you have any maybe words of encouragement, words of advice for them? Because I think what I'm getting at is like my belief, Allison, and I don't know if this is your belief, but like I think education is so transformative, and like higher education, especially, like it is an invaluable experience, and like that's something that needs to be just like beaten into people's head. But yeah, I'm just curious about like what advice you would give to those people who just don't have kind of those networks encouraging them in that way.
Right, for sure. That's like a fair question, because I know like depending on people's background too, like there could be a lot of like other financial stress and burdens where like, college is not, yeah, it's not like the priority and not what people like are worried about. So I think like I definitely agree with you that higher education is just such a great opportunity and has like exposed me to incredible experiences that like I'm so thankful for. So I think if people, want to experience these new things and like meet new people and learn so much, I think I definitely recommend like going online, max school prep, or like, there's like resources online, because while like it would be so nice to have people like close to you in your corner, like family members that are encouraging, if they don't have like the bandwidth for that, or depending on your situation, like I just think finding some encouragement through friends, or maybe really good books. And I'm trying to think of like any podcasts that I could recommend, or like YouTube channels are great and will have like a ton of really great people who are willing to share their insight and wisdom. So um while it might take some extra work, which is kind of like a theme of being first gen or from a lower income, like you might have to learn things on your own or in a different way than other college students. But I think when you take that extra step to find resources and find those people who can inspire you and kind of become your mentor, even through like online forums, then that could go a long way.
I think that's a beautiful message that you are just like conveying of this idea that sometimes the community that we're given, like the community that we have no choice over because we're born into a family, sometimes we're put into a school, like those are communities that we're kind of forced into, might not always be the most helpful or the most encouraging, given a wide variety of circumstances. It might not even be because they don't want to invest in you, but I think you said it perfectly, like about bandwidth. Sometimes there's just not the capacity for that. And I think something that has been a real theme of at least my senior year is exactly what you're saying, is this idea of like sometimes we have to go and seek out our community and like put in that extra work, which is annoying at times. And you're right, like especially people from marginalized background, it is extra work, and that's not always fair that those cards have been dealt. But it is going to be so rewarding and so fulfilling when you go and you're scrappy and you're trying to find those different outlets that may not necessarily have just been handed to you. So I'm glad that you emphasized that and provided that word of encouragement. And if any podcasts come to your mind later, definitely flag them or put them in the chat, and I can put them in my caption for the video. But Something else that I wanted to get at with you is how would you, it's a two-part question. So you can, if you forget one of them, I can ask again. But one, how would you say that sort of the scary price tag that is on Duke and other like prestigious elite higher ed institutions, like how would you say that kind of on first glance superficially when you're like, okay, how much does it cost to go to a school like this? How do you feel like that informed, maybe created fear, anxiety, whatever, as you were navigating your college application process? And then the other question would be, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's answer that, and then I'll give you the second question afterwards.
Okay, yeah, this is such a good question. And I actually wrote about this in my Why Duke essay because I kind of had a misconception that Duke was going to be more expensive for me than a lot of other schools. So to give some context of like my application process, I wanted to stay close to family. And so I was applying to a lot of schools in North Carolina or just like bordering states and specifically public schools. And I will mention that I applied to QuestBridge as well, which if anyone is interested in looking at QuestBridge, that's a really great option. I was a QuestBridge finalist, but I didn't go through the match process. And looking back, I'm not sure if that was the best decision. But again, like I didn't know that much about like binding and the match process. And I just was like a little worried about like committing myself really early to a school because
Let me ask you. So basically, when you become a finalist, do they say, "Hey, like I don't know how it works"? So they say, "Hey, like rank your schools, and you'll be matched." And you were like, "Actually, I'm pulling out. Like I don't want to do this." Is that what you're saying?
it's kind of, yeah. So the first part is like you become a QuestBridge finalist, and then you have the option like, okay, would you like to continue and go through the match process? And then you would rank your schools and stuff like that. But at that point, I was like, no. And so you're still like, I remember on the application, you can still like say you're recognized as a QuestBridge finalist, and your application fee is waived for the schools that participate in the program. Yeah, so that's a good question. So yeah, so I still applied to like I applied to Duke and Vanderbilt and I think a few others since the application fee was waived, and I was like I might as well. And yeah, but I remember just thinking like these schools are probably so expensive, how is it going to work? But then I found out that Duke meets 100% of your demonstrated need. And so for me personally, it actually ended up being cheaper for me to come here to Duke than to go to my other top choice, UNC. And Chapel Hill was just a top choice for me because I grew up like a Tar Heel and I was a fan, mostly through sports. And it's like a great school. So just for me personally, Duke actually ended up being cheaper. So I think it was scary at first. And I was wondering like, will I have to take out loans? Like, how is this going to work? But my mom was actually she was just a strong person in my corner who helped me find a lot of like outside scholarships as well. Whether that was through Beta that I mentioned or local ones, there's a SAT scholarship. But so luckily just for me, it was cheaper to come here because Duke had more capacity to offer me a lot of aid. So, but I do know that it's scary looking at these like large price tags and thinking, how is this going to work? But luckily, like a lot of these elite schools and have a lot of funding to be able to help students. And so in my case, Duke has really helped me. So yeah, that's my experience with financial aid and stuff.
I'm glad that you shared that, and I'm hoping that as people sort of navigate through each video that I have in this student success story playlist on my channel, that is a very common theme. I ask this question in different variations oftentimes, and it is a huge misconception that, hey, this price tag is what I'm going to have to pay out of pocket. And I'm glad that you mentioned that it is the elite schools, like the ones, the top 10 on US News World Report, whatever, the ones with the huge endowments, these private institutions, are the ones that usually are going to make a way for meeting 100% of your demonstrated financial need. And if you were watching this and you're like, well, how do I find out about that? Kind of like Allison was getting at, go be scrappy and look at their website information, but also the financial aid office on all of these schools, their contact information is publicly available. You can call them and be like, hey, I'm a prospective student. This is sort of the income of my parents. What are you expecting? How does this work? What is y'all's process for evaluating estimated family contribution, et cetera? So I try to drive home in each of these videos that I do that do not be deterred from going to a really good school just because of what it looks like on face value, how much you're going to have to pay. Because I think one of the beautiful things about these schools is that if you have the demonstrated skill to be able to get in, they want to make a way for you to be able to attend school here, right? And that means throwing money at you. Allison, I'm also glad that you brought up this idea of just like applying the scholarships. Yeah, that takes extra work, but there are also, not only are there scholarships based on merit or based on service and scholarship, like you said with Beta, but also based on income. There are scholarships that are specifically targeted towards folks from a lower socioeconomic status or towards people of a particular identity, race, ethnic background, et cetera. So going and investigating that information is going to be invaluable. And so I'm glad that you have encouraged people on that front. So switching gears into my next question, Allison, I'm curious about how you, and I think you're going to have a really good perspective on this. So you're a senior now, so I want you to think back to young little 18-year-old Allison coming in as a freshman. What was that, what was hard about coming to school and being the first one in your immediate family to go to college? Like, what sort of hurdles did you experience? How did you surmount those? And what encouragement do you have for people that are like, yeah, I want to go to college, but like, I don't have any role models to look to? So I'm gonna toss that over to you.
Yeah. So just thinking back to that, it seems like such a long time ago, but also like time has flown, so it also doesn't seem that long ago. But I remember moving in and my parents helped me, and the moment they left, well, first I was like stalling. I really didn't want them to leave. And then that night I was just like alone in my dorm and I got really emotional. I was like crying because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm really here and they're gone. I'm in this like whole new environment. And so I think I felt I just was like homesick kind of from the start. And that's even for me, that's like my parents are only a 2-hour drive away. But I will say, like, for a lot of us that graduated high school in 2020 and then came in, there's a lot happening. And so I think I just felt even more isolated. But it was amazing because the Duke Life community here, which is for lower income and first generation college students, which you can look into if you're watching. Maybe a lot of other schools have like programs and communities like this, but they actually were doing like a giveaway and like giving away a lot of like dorm necessities and stuff like that. And so I remember my first day here at Duke and moving in, I actually got to meet one of the program assistants from Duke Life. And so that just has stuck with me, that like my moment on campus, I was able to see someone face to face and they were like helping me with like getting this like lamp and like bed sheets and stuff like that. And then I ended up still like connecting with her, and even though she's left Duke, like she's still someone that like I think about and hope is doing well. But so I think it was definitely a transition, and I felt a little shaken up and alone, but eventually I got into the groove of things. And I think the thing that was most difficult was just finding like a new community here and friends that I could really be myself around. So because you come to find out, like, in these spaces people are from like very different backgrounds, and so you just kind of like sense people and like where they're coming from, and kind of like what their values are. And so I was lucky to find like a really good friend on my hallway that was just like sweet, and we're still friends to this day. She's like my best friend here at Duke. So I think that finding community piece was a little difficult. And in terms of classes, I will say that since our classes were online our first year, that transition might have been a little like easier in my opinion. Yeah.
Like in some ways, because I'm like emotional, like social and emotionally, like I was alone. Allison, I was just like these virtual classes, I don't have any friends, you know? But
Right.
academically, yeah, probably.
Right. Exactly. Because like it was just such a weird time. And so yeah, definitely like the social and emotional support was different. But I think like academics, not like being in this huge lecture hall and feeling a lot of intimidation like in the classroom might have helped. And also like the sort of grace that could have been implemented during those classes first year. But I will say that uh classes like chemistry I took my first year that were like tough, and like I didn't have a like great chemistry background in my high school. So there were different resources here that for sure helped me, and I had to just figure out like how I studied and like what worked for me. And so that's a hurdle to get over, but I think there luckily like at Duke there's support systems, and Sage is like a peer tutoring program that I participated in that entire first year that I think definitely helped me and helped me make connections with upperclassmen who were running these tutoring groups. And getting that advice from upperclassmen was definitely something that I loved, and I still love like today, like talking to alum and everything, because I think hearing and learning from people's stories and their personal experiences and what helped them was definitely something that like I just tried to incorporate and test out like what worked for me when I was navigating Duke coming in.
I was taking so many notes because I'm like, Allison, you say so many like gold mine nuggets, and I'm like, oh, like so many things I need to comment on. So one, I'll say that I think I think this is something that you need to hear. But I feel like you've done a beautiful job of like walking the walk of like you gave the advice about being scrappy and finding community, and it's like so clear and so evident based on like the way that you kind of described your freshman year and the different networks and outlets you got involved in with Duke Life and Sage and doing figuring out meeting the girl on your hallway, like all of these different ways to adapt in this new environment where you were homesick and you did miss your family, but you were like, hey, this is the new place that I'm in and I need to find my people here. And I hope that that can serve as an encouragement for folks who are watching this video. A lot of questions I get asked are, what is Duke like for students who are from, for students who are like people of color, students who are from lower income backgrounds? Like the bottom line is we are a PWI, right? We got a lot of rich kids here. We got a lot of white kids here. We got a lot of, I mean, some of these folks coming from are the spawn of famous people. Some of them are going to be famous, and so I hope that people can feel inspired by what you're saying, Allison, that like it doesn't matter the sort of niche background you may be coming from. There is always going to be somebody in this space that if you are willing to do the work of connecting with them and going and seeking them out and figuring out like who is your people or who are your people, you will be able to find those connections. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. And something that I would, I guess, want to talk to you a little bit more about is you said in terms of like intimidation in the classroom. Do you find that now in like now we're back to in person and all of that, and we've been that way for a few years. I guess what has your experience been like with that? I haven't had a person bring that up, and I kind of want to dig into that a little bit more of kind of what you were getting at and how you've overcome that, because we do have a lot of loud voices in the class, and sometimes it's nerve-wracking to raise your hand and to advocate for yourself. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I the first thing I thought of was back to organic chemistry when I took that class, and I was just it was not clicking for me. and I felt like, oh my gosh, this I know is like, even the professor mentioned how it's normally like a weed out class and a lot of you want to go to medical school, and just like the pressure built up on those like pre-medical requirements, which disclaimer, I'm no longer pre-med and I dropped that. Not because of this class, but um for other reasons. But I just remember feeling like it wasn't clicking and I didn't know what to do. And then I was talking to a friend or like an acquaintance more in the class about this. And they're like, oh, I have these practice exams I can share with you. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, where did you get these? Because they weren't like released. They weren't available to everyone. And so that was like my first introduction to, oh wow, people have like access to certain things based on who you know. Maybe if you are in these like white Greek life, like sororities and stuff like that. And so that was like my first realization that you really like, unfortunately, students of color probably don't have that same access to, practice exams and stuff like that. So that was just a shock to me, and I realized like I might be, disadvantaged. And I think navigating, you mentioned like a PWI and just like how Greek life can be exclusive, that sort of thing. It's a weird dynamic because I'm like, oh, like you kind of feel this tug to be a part of the spaces, but then you're like, oh, do I really want to be a part of it? Or is it just kind of like this thing where you might like have access and be praised or like have this like status if you're in these spaces. But luckily, a lot of my other experiences in classrooms have been really positive. And so I mentioned I'm a psych major, and I know you are as well. So I love the psych department, and the professors in the department are really amazing, and the professors I've interacted with. So I think in other spaces, I've felt like pretty comfortable to talk to a professor or like speak up in class. And I think some professors are really strategic about group work and things like that to get the students talking and to like build community and maybe even new friendships within the class with people who you might, might not have the courage to like actually just go up to someone after class or something like that. But when there's these group assignments, those that can help kind of like take down those barriers. So yeah, I think like I've definitely have maybe my fair share of like imposter syndrome in the classroom, but I've grown to just kind of be more confident. And I think that like takes time, and I'm still not perfect about it, and like I still compare myself to others. But I think one thing that's important, and has helped me, is finding people in the classroom who you can study with and that you don't feel that way around them. You can be very honest and vulnerable with each other, and you're kind of like in it together, you know what I mean? And even if you don't have someone in your specific class like that, but maybe just like friends that you have like in your general social support system that will be there to support you, and kind of like you can talk things out with them. I think that has really helped me and just kind of like brought perspective that helps me see like, we're all here, we all like deserve to be here, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think a few things to say in response is like, one, I'm glad that you brought up this idea of there are just some people who, by way of having access to the right people and really leveraging the sort of the whole who you know system, have been given unfair advantages in these spaces. And I think it made me think about like a real expectation that people should have coming into college, especially in a place like in super elite spaces. And I think this is probably consistent in other spaces too, but I have found that people of color, and you address this, Allison, like really do have to work like twice as hard for like the same grade, right? And like there are people who I've like had experience seeing people cheat, and I'm like, like you're never gonna get caught, or you have access to this test that you probably shouldn't have access to, and yet here I am at the library studying for it for 5 or 6 hours, and I know we're going to get the same grade, and like it's just not fair, right? And I don't think there's really any real reassurance for that other than just trusting that if you are doing the work to not cut corners and you are doing the work to truly learn the content that's in front of you, I like to be optimistic and think that in some way, some shape or form, that'll pay off for you in the future and the scales will be evened somehow. Um, but you just got to keep going and try to not be discouraged in that way. But also, Allison, I think you brought up a great point too that people don't always like to talk about when it comes to college, because I think it's just like it can be a little bit negative. But is this idea of there are there are not I would say that it's not there are not a plethora of spaces where people can truly be authentic and vulnerable. Like I have found that that is only with a small minority of people, my closest friends, who I'm like, yeah, I'm stressed. Yeah, I'm overwhelmed. Final season sucks. Like I really feel whatever. Whereas with a majority of people, like it just seems like, okay, everything's great. Like I'm balancing, I'm going out, I'm partying, I'm sleeping, like my grades are great. And it's like that's impossible. But that's what really breeds the imposter syndrome and that feeling of inadequacy. And I think you're right that like the only key to that is finding those people you can be authentic with. And that's the real deal. Like everybody has their struggle, but some people are just not going to be as forthright about it. And you can't allow that to get into your head. You just kind of have to like see through their BS, if you know what I mean. So, anyways, to kind of switch a little bit, I wanted to ask you about kind of you mentioned um, that you came in as pre-med, and I'm curious about like what inspired you to be on the pre-med track, and now that you've shifted towards psych, like what are you thinking of in terms of your future? And we are both about to graduate. I don't have any plans for I'm still figuring it out. So don't feel like this is like a what are you doing with your future, Allison? But I'm just curious about that transition and how that even felt completely dropping pre-med and feeling like gotta switch gears and do some things.
Yeah, this is a good question. So I came in actually wanting to be a veterinarian. So I grew up loving animals, and Richlands, like I mentioned earlier, is a really small town in North Carolina. So like in my backyard, my neighbors like have their pasture running back there. So I grew up like with cows and like horses around, and a lot of like agriculture is like a business, and I know people who have their own farms and everything. So I just was interested in being a vet coming in. I was like, okay, well then I should major in biology, right? And I think I just had a lot of these assumptions, and I quickly figured out like, oh, I love animals, but maybe I don't like want to like care, like I don't know, I don't want that to be my career. I really like working with people, but I enjoy this healthcare space and like helping people, so I should become a doctor. And I did take like health science classes in high school, and I was a part of HOSA, which some people might be familiar with. I can't remember the exact correct term, but like HOSA and Skills USA, like I can't remember what HOSA stands for, but yeah, so I kind of was involved in healthcare a little bit, and I liked just that idea of helping people and like being with people when they're vulnerable, and guiding them through that. So yeah, so about up to my junior year, that's what I was planning on doing. I did end up declaring my major in psychology, which I did at the end of my second year, which is when a lot of Duke students declare. And that was just because I took AP Psych in high school and I really, really loved it. And then I got here, and like I mentioned, I was thinking biology, but then I took psychology classes. I took the what used to be called abnormal psych and is now clinical psych. And then I took Psych 101 the beginning of my sophomore year. And I just really enjoyed it. And I remembered my great experience back in high school taking AP. So I decided to major in that. And I was still pre-med at the time. But then um basically my junior fall, I was like, you know what, I don't know if I want to go to medical school. And I was talking to some deans about it, who are just like mentors here on college campuses. So I was talking to a dean and she was kind of guiding me through like how to keep options open. And I I felt this kind of intuition, which it's really tough to trust your gut sometimes and to listen to like your emotional mind almost, because Duke and some other spaces are very like pre-professional focused, and there's like a clear track, and like when you're falling off the track, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? So it definitely was tough to even say like I'm dropping pre-med, because I'm like, oh, like, is it because like I can't do it? Like, is it like, do I truly not want this? I'm just trying to figure out like what I want versus like these external pressures and expectations. But I realized I really love psych, and I liked this idea of like a therapeutic alliance with a client, because I was interested in specifically psychiatry if I did go the MD route. And so I kind of just dug into that more, like, oh, if I'm leaning towards psychiatry, then like, is MD the route I want to take? Or are there other options, whether that's like a master's in social work or a PhD in clinical psych or something like that? Are those like a better fit for me? So yeah, I just liked the idea of really getting to know someone in therapy rather than as a psychiatrist. I know like meetings might be like shorter and stuff like that, and a lot more focused around like medication. Um, so that's kind of like what helped me when I was like thinking through the transition, like what I wanted my relationship with people to be like when I'm working in the future. Um, and so yeah, it was definitely tough to admit that I'm like dropping pre-med. But I will say so many people change their mind about what they want to do. It is so common, and tying back to this like kind of facade people put on, like I got everything figured out, when that is not the case. A lot of people, it's very common to be unsure what you want to do when you're 18 to like 21, 22 years old. So I think even now, like in the future, if I wanted to become a doctor, I could still try to. It's not like that door is completely closing. But yeah, so once I decided I wanted to pursue clinical psych, which is my plan right now, I have sought out like other experiences, which ties back into Boston. So over the summer, I was working at this like summer treatment program for kids with ADHD, which I really loved that. And I've gotten involved in more like global health and psychology research as time has went on. So just like feeling out my options, and again, like trying to really listen to myself and that instinct, which I know is like tough, but trying to, think like what I really enjoy doing. And so my plan right now, again, like you, I don't really know what I'm going to do after graduation, because I'm not applying to graduate programs right now. I'm going to take at least one gap year. Yeah. So I'm just like, I'm figuring out like what I want to do during that gap year. Maybe like some sort of like fellowships are out there, like more short term, like 1 to 2 year positions and stuff like that. So we'll see.
Well, Allison, what I will say to all of that is I think while it is very tempting to down yourself for, I guess, like following emotion and following intuition and kind of putting to the side that more logic based brain, I honestly think that there is immense courage in being able to act on self awareness. And I think that that is a theme that's been ringing true throughout this entire interview with you as well. Like, even when we go back to what you brought up around Greek life and being like, do I want to be a part of these communities? It seems exclusive and it seems cool and it seems like everybody's doing that, but is that for me? Right? Like, I don't think you realize how much of a hard skill that it is to acquire that you've already been relying on is being able to really separate what are the expectations that are being placed on me and how does that differ or align with what I want for myself. Like, I still very much struggle with like separating my parents' voice from my voice. Like, I don't really know which one that is in my head, right? And like I just want to give you kudos for taking really hard steps, such as dropping pre-med, such as like whatever, to be able to follow the fulfillment that you were able to feel in your intuition when you're doing certain positions. And I hope, and like committing yourself to certain pursuits. And I hope that that can give, also be an inspiration to people of everything is really going to work out. And like, even when the plan changes and it isn't what you originally came in thinking, like, if you are following your heart and following what you love and doing what fills you up, everything, like, it will all fall into place. And so that takes bravery, but like, look at how you lit up when you were talking about your experience in Boston, right? Like, I hope that that's what everybody would want for their future career, is to be like, dang, I'm excited to go to work. I'm excited about the relationships I'm building here. Like, this feel like it doesn't, sure, consulting and making money like that, if that fills you up, great. But like, I just think that's so beautiful to like chase that fulfillment and chase that impact and chase what just brings you joy. So I just want to commend you for that. And also showcase to people as well that like Allison and I are both people right now who are like, yeah, we've got 6 months before we graduate and we still don't know exactly what we're going to do. The applications, at least for me, have not been sent out. And I'm like, okay, that's all right. It's like, it's going to fall into place. Like, it's going to be fine. And so really being able to, I think it's a great skill to practice, is like bucking what the status quo is. The status quo becomes extremely suffocating in a place like Duke, where it feels like all of us are robots that people are trying to feed into the same track. And like, being able to get out of that, that takes courage. And like, Allison, you are a true testament to that. So I promised 11 o'clock, so I'm going to ask you one last closing question, and then we'll stay. I'm going to end the recording, and then we'll stay on because I have a couple of things to say to you. All good things. That sounded like really intense for the people that are watching. They're like, ooh, she's in trouble. She's not. But if you had to leave our people watching, I always close like this, so this is not just like some random question, but if you had to leave our people watching with like one last thing, maybe it's a quote that means a lot to you, maybe it's a song, like, I don't know, but something that has inspired you personally, maybe it's something that your friend has said, I don't know, that can just give some people a bit of a boost, a bit of some encouragement, what would you leave them with? And you can take this any way you want. Like, it can literally be like, I don't know, a Bible verse, like, it doesn't matter. But yeah, just something encouraging to leave our people watching with.
Yeah. So I will just say something that I realized, in that this might be like such a simple mind shift, and you might be like, this isn't great advice, but when I was like struggling to get assignments done, I had to realize it's not my fault. There's just a lot to do. And like, although this seems like such like, I don't know, minute, like not really anything, I think just not blaming yourself for having to like work hard or like work long hours or something to get assignments done, and that it truly is just sometimes like a difficult class, or like you have a lot of responsibilities and commitments. I think just making that shift of like, it's not my fault and it's not me, it's not my problem, really helped me. And I will just say that like, I really think that, you know, it's just worth trying is another thing I want to say. I will be honest and transparent that like, when I've talked to people as a tour guide or like students at my old high school, a lot of them are like worried about test scores and stuff like that. And I just want to say like, I like, just don't doubt yourself, because while I like might have not pictured myself going to Duke, I think like just trying and putting yourself out there, while it is scary, you can you know, really see some benefits in the end. Because if you don't do it, it's already a no, but it might be a yes once you try. Yeah.
I think that is a beautiful reframing, and I think that is good advice, not dumb advice. No, I don't know why you said that. I would be like, oh, don't think that, whatever. I think that it's like, literally, it ties perfectly to us as psych majors. It's all about the reframe. Like, that is literally, our mind creates our reality, and so if you can think about something in a different way, you're golden. Now, I will add a caveat. to what you are saying, because I do agree that it is important to not internalize and personalize like a lot of things. I'm dealing with that in like relationships. Like sometimes it's not about you when somebody doesn't respond to you. Like, girl, it's not a problem that you have. But what I will say, Allison, is sometimes it is you. So if you're feeling like you have a lot of work and you've been sliding on TikTok all day long, okay, well, that is you. Okay, like that's not the circumstance. So I think the caveat that I will add, and this is like the future lawyer in me, like always looking at the semantics, is if you're giving your best, then it's not your problem. Like then it's not something that you should internalize. So if you really are trying in your classes and you're still feeling stressed and overwhelmed, that's normal. It's hard. If you are being yourself and somebody still doesn't want you, that's not your problem, right? Like that's the slight nuance of like sometimes you did do something wrong. So we don't need to let people get too big of a head and be like, well, Allison told me like it's never me. But anyways, I think that that was wonderful, and that was a good reframe that I needed to hear for today as well. And with that, I hope that everybody enjoyed this conversation between Allison and I, and we are going to wrap it up. Thank you so much again, Allison, for staying on and for joining me for this interview.
Thank